Welcome back to First Mover. Ripple is starting a central bank digital currency platform which allows central banks, governments, and financial institutions to issue their own digital currency. Joining us now to discuss is James Wallis, Vice President of Central Bank CBDCs at Ripple. James, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jen. Great to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Now, let's just start off here. Is this a pivot or diversification of the business?
It's diversification. Ripple is broadening out our different lines of business, and we see a big opportunity with central banks and CBDCs.
Talk to me a little bit more about that opportunity you see with central banks. What kind of conversations are you having?
Lots of conversations with lots of central banks. I think 90% or so of central banks around the world are evaluating CBDCs. We sort of view CBDCs as one of many digital currencies that will coexist in the world. So, as a company, we're talking to central banks about CBDC. We're also talking to commercial banks about what they will do with CBDCs. We're also talking to commercial banks and other institutions about stablecoins. And then, of course, we're renowned for being in the crypto space. So we view all of these different digital currencies coexisting, and we'd like to be involved in all of them.
What clients do you have right now?
So right now we have several clients. We've announced 4. Today, actually, in parallel with this announcement, we announced that we're working with the HKMA in Hong Kong on building out a real estate tokenization platform with CBDC. We also have 3 other projects, one with the Central Bank of Montenegro, and then 2 others. One is with the Central Bank, the Royal Monetary Authority in Bhutan. And then the final is with Palau, which is a republic. It doesn't have actually a central bank, so we're working with them to issue a government-issued stablecoin.
You just mentioned 4 jurisdictions that are very different from each other. Talk to me a little bit about why you're choosing to work with these governments first.
Well, as I said, we are working with some others that we can't talk about yet. But generally, we find that a lot of the smaller countries are a bit more nimble and are able to do things more quickly. Probably the opposite end of the spectrum is, the European Central Bank, the Eurozone, or the US, where it's a very complex environment, a lot of different vested, interested parties, regulatory uncertainty in some cases. So some other countries, the countries I mentioned, are able to move more quickly, and that is great for us because it gives us great experience, early on in this marketplace, and it's also great for those countries as well.
I want to get your opinion on what's been happening here in the U.S. So some state-level governments have voiced concerns about privacy when it comes to CBDC projects that may be run by the federal government in the future. When you see this news, what's your immediate reaction?
My immediate reaction is I think there's some more education needed in the marketplace. I think there's a lot of discussion around a CBDC, what it is, what it isn't. Is it the government going to be spying on citizens? All this kind of thing. So I think there's education required. At the end of the day, I think the federal government, trumps state governments in this. But I think really, I don't think the citizens have anything to be concerned about. CBDC is a digital representation of fiat currency. It's likely to get implemented in pretty much every country around the world. It's coming. There are going to be some great advantages to it, great use cases that will, people will get benefit from. So I see news like that. I think, okay, well, this will probably disappear when people get a bit smarter, a bit more educated about what's really going to happen.
James, I think the privacy concerns are valid, though, right? What's your response to the privacy concerns? Is it just that once you use it, those concerns will go away?
No. So firstly, I think privacy, the way that these digital currencies will get implemented, will be based upon the rules and regulations that are set up by the regulators, right? So the technology can support privacy to whatever extent the regulators allow it. So, this is a big talking topic in Europe as well, where there's talk about transactions below a certain limit being completely anonymous, transactions above that limit being known. And the question then is who knows it, right? So today, you and I have a lot of transactions with our banks, other financial institutions, that data doesn't roll up to the government. I think the most likely way that a retail CBDC will be implemented will be as a two-tier system. So that means the central bank will issue the currency and distribute it to the commercial banks. Commercial banks will then distribute it to you and I through wallets. There's nothing that says that the central bank needs to have transaction data fed up to their central database. So it can be implemented in lots of different ways. I agree, privacy is a big factor, but it's down in the detail of how this thing gets implemented.
G7 leaders are discussing CBDC policy this week in Japan. In your opinion, what's the best outcome that we can have from this meeting?
I think recognition of the value of CBDC, and that I think it's in the best interests of the world to have everyone sort of moving it along in parallel. One of the big use cases for CBDC is better cross-border payments. In fact, there's sort of three sort of fundamental use cases, or primitives as I call them. There's cash replacement, there's wholesale CBDC for interbank settlement, and there's cross-border. Obviously, cross-border requires collaboration between governments. So that, for me, that would be a great outcome. And the other thing I would add, Jen, is that we see those sort of basics as just the basic platform. We see a lot of the really innovative use cases that will come out will be coming out from the private sector. So it's really important the private sector engage, whether that be the commercial banks or fintechs or other institutions. That's where the real fun is going to start. And that's where we can get into Web3 finance applications where you're using a CBDC or a stablecoin for settlement on tokenizing real estate, which is the project we're doing in Hong Kong right now. So that would be a great outcome. Let the private sector at it, right? Because I think that's where the real innovation is going to come.
There's been a lot of discussion around stablecoins being used to solve some of the same issues that you've just outlined. What's your take on the stablecoins versus CBDC debate? Can stablecoins do the same thing?
I think from a technical functionality point of view, there's not a big difference between stablecoin and CBDC. The real issue is who's issuing it and who's backing it. So we do see a world of coexistence. I think CBDC will become ultimately the preferred digital currency for a lot of people because they feel safe and secure because it's backed by the central bank. But we see them coexisting, and the same way that we see cryptos coexisting. Our Ripple network, as you may know, uses XRP as a bridge currency between currencies as a way to negate the need to pre-fund accounts. We call it on-demand liquidity. So we think all of these different digital currencies have a role to play and will all coexist.
You mentioned that trust in the central bank piece, and I can speak to what's happening here in North America with inflation rising, interest rates rising. I think that trust is being eroded at. Is that something that you think needs to be repaired before we can see adoption of CBDCs? I don't see the real connection. I think the CBDC is a technical innovation that allows a digital currency to be used in the same kind of ways that you can use cash, but then also in other more creative ways. So, I think CBDC might help, improve the image of central banks, but I don't see a big connection, to be honest. All right, let's talk about infrastructure now. Is Ripple going to be playing any kind of role in developing infrastructure for the central banks that you work with?
So, the platform that we have developed is infrastructure. So it's essentially as a ledger, the private ledger, which is based on the XRP ledger technology. We have an issuer and an operator elements, which is really the software on top that allows the central banks and commercial banks to manage the software. And then there's the wallets for the end users. So, so we see ourselves as builders of this technology, builders of this infrastructure we provide to the central banks, and then they would implement it in their own environment.
When I say infrastructure, I guess I'm talking more about, offline scenarios, like maybe scenarios where people don't have smartphones. Are those, is that type of infrastructure anything that Ripple will be involved in?
Thank you for clarifying the question. Yes, so offline is a really big topic. I think pretty much every country that we're talking to has a requirement for offline transactions. So we have a couple of partners that we're working with on the wallet space that will provide that capability.
You mentioned real estate tokenization. Tell me a little bit more about that element.
Yeah, so this is a really cool project we just announced today with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. The basic premise of it is tokenizing real estate and then enabling that real estate once tokenized to be able to take a loan against it. So releasing some capital from your property. We're partnering with Fubon Bank, which is a large bank with a big subsidiary in Hong Kong. And we're working also with Toko and DLA Piper, a legal firm, and then LoanSnap, who provide a sort of DeFi environment. So the idea here is you can put some of your property up for releasing capital. That will again get paid to you in the form of a CBDC, and then that CBDC could be spent in other use cases or could be converted back into fiat if you preferred. So it's early days, but it's a really good example of a Web3 environment leveraging CBDC.
How long do you think it's going to take before something like that is mainstream?
That's the big question, right? Everyone's asking the question, how long is it going to take? I think it depends. You could talk to different people and get answers from like 1 to 2 years to like 5 to 10 years. There's different surveys being done. I think the countries that are leaning in more will be up and running with CBDC in the sort of 2 to 3 year time frame. I think then the other use cases like the one we're talking about in Hong Kong, that can be facilitated. So I think there's a similar sort of time frame for these other applications to sit on top.
Now we have to talk about this acquisition that's hit the news this week. Ripple announced plans to acquire Swiss crypto custody provider. Can you tell us a little bit more about the European expansion plans?
Yeah, so again, very, very exciting news. It's like a super busy week for us this week in Ripple. So we're really proud to announce the acquisition. It's part of our expanding our business. Obviously, we're expanding our business in a couple of ways. One is lines of business. So I mentioned, we have payments. I mentioned we have liquidity, we have CBDCs, and now we have custody. So that's a natural expansion for us. And also, with them being based in Switzerland, it's an expansion geographically for us. We are expanding much more quickly outside of the US than we are within the US.
Well, I know that your CEO joined other crypto CEOs in saying, we're looking at countries that are outside of the US because of the unclear regulation. Can we expect Ripple to expand even more? I know we're talking about Europe right now, but can we expect Ripple to be looking at other jurisdictions as well?
Yeah, I think the Metaco acquisition, as you know, based in Switzerland, is a good example in Europe. We are hiring, considerably in other jurisdictions. As our business grows, it's a global business. I expect that trend to continue.
James, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was James Wallis from Ripple.